Do you want to introduce yourself, Dwayne?
Yeah, my name is Wayne Johnson. I'm the past president of the Northwest Animal Rights Network and a longtime animal rights activist.
Okay. I'm Aouie. I'm also an advocate of veganism, and I'm having a conversation today because I think many of us vegans are very sure of ourselves, and we sometimes fail to be reasonable when we are confronted with reasonable arguments against veganism. And I'm hoping that by confronting it within the vegan movement, we'll just be more open, less hostile towards those with differing views. So that's the intent of my conversations. It can be tough for some people, but we can always take a break if we need to.
Well, as you can tell from the noise here of these clever, loving beings being marched to their death for corporate profit and for our dinner tables, there are reasons that vegans may seem intractable and somewhat stubborn in their arguments. Having said that, Aouie, I think you are absolutely right that when that approach is used, it's not very effective and it's not very compassionate for people who claim to be compassionate and effective people. So the kind of work that you're doing, for example, by trying to dialogue with people in public, which you've been doing for a long time, I think is the way to go. However, as I said before, I think it's understandable that there sometimes is an impression given by the vegan community that we are indeed intolerant. When we show that understandable intolerance, I think we make a mistake.
Okay. Let's take, for example, do you believe that veganism should be a requirement for everyone in society?
Well, I think eventually we're going to get there, but right now I think that if we can have people come close to veganism and approach veganism with things like meatless Mondays or going vegetarian or going mostly vegetarian, we'll begin to make some impact. Having a whole vegan society, perhaps that's a great ideal. I don't think we're going to reach it in my lifetime or yours.
Okay. There are some people who hope we will, and the approach in life and activism is to make that happen. And my concern is that when they use that approach, one, they're not being very reasonable. And so I want to have these theoretical conversations that many of us vegans do and more or less challenge our own beliefs. So let's take, for example, a time in society when it's already illegal to farm, to hunt, and all that stuff, but we have one human who's going over and picking up a snail or an ant and just eating it. And some other vegans want to outlaw that and make them vegan. Now that's something that I would personally be voting against because I'm not comfortable with interfering with other people's worldviews. And some vegans believe that it's absolutely right to interfere with their worldview. What's your view on it?
Well, my view on that is that it's fine for theoretical arguments, but we're standing outside a slaughterhouse that kills 6,000 pigs every single week, that as we talk is installing a gas chamber so they can double that to 12,000 pigs every single week for Farmer John's products and for bacon for our tables. So whether or not we kill the last snail is an interesting hypothetical conception, but all I'm working to do is to get a little more compassion in this society so people will stop eating these pigs, and so people will stop eating these cows, and people will stop eating these chickens, and people will stop eating that lamb, so we can get a certain amount of respect for other animals.
I agree that that's important to work on, but as I started off mentioning, it's these edge case issues that differentiates us being reasonable and unreasonable in the eyes of most others who don't believe in veganism. And it is these kinds of views that actually challenges the vegans and makes them question their own beliefs, and maybe will change that thing inside of themselves that'll make them approach others who believe differently with a little more compassion. Because right now, even though you may not focus on it, there are people who are listening to others whose viewpoints are animals have a right to live, no one has a right to take away their life, and they just apply these as absolutes, and they speak to those who believe that they should be free to do what they want without reflecting on that other person's value that they don't want to be interfered with.
Yeah, I think the idea of persuading other people to join your cause, whether it be veganism or vegetarianism, is a tricky challenge. I'm an old guy, as you can see, and I marched with Dr. King. So I believe in nonviolent civil disobedience as one way of inciting people to believe in justice. And in this case, I carry that over, at least in my own personal life, with getting justice for the animals. So you're right, again, in a hypothetical way, that veganism is something that needs to be promoted with love and compassion. We don't always do that, and when we do that, I believe we fail.
Okay. I agree that there are many different ways of approaching a cause that you feel dearly about, and I have no problem with someone who may even want to do something totally illegal, even if it means killing someone because they think it's necessary to do what they believe is for the greater good. I'm not disputing people's preferred tactics. I'm more concerned about people's belief itself. For example, when others have this conversation with a non-meat eater, with a non-vegan, with a meat eater, they'll sometimes say stuff like, animals have an absolute right to live. It is not necessary, therefore you must not kill, with a very absolutist kind of view. And it doesn't sit right with most people because they don't think that way.
Well, I think if you can get people to start with the premise of animals suffer and animals have rights, I think most people would agree that animals shouldn't suffer. You can start off by saying they shouldn't be killing their dog. They would agree with that. They shouldn't be killing a cat. They would agree with that. Now, once you ask them the question, what's the difference between the dog and the pig, you at least get them thinking. Now, I'm against trying to bludgeon them, and I'm certainly against killing anybody. As I said, I march with Dr. King. I believe in nonviolent civil disobedience. But I am for taking more of an edge than the animal rights movement is taking right now. For example, by trying to enforce the law, which is to save animals, and going into slaughterhouses and saving those animals, for example, in the state of California, who are sick, who are injured, I think we're obeying the law, and we're saying to people, this has to stop.
Okay. We are in agreement as far as most of the things you're talking about, and it's my interest also that most of us don't stop doing activism when I challenge their views. I want them to keep doing whatever they believe they need to do to make things more right from their own subjective points of view.
Yeah.
And so I'm not disputing the urgency of the cause and all that stuff. But I'm just going to role play as a meat eater for now, and maybe in the conversation you'll do it just perfectly, or maybe there'll be some issues we can discuss of how it can be done better. So let's say I'm a meat eater and I'm saying, well, yeah, I do eat animals, but I get them from a humane farm. And, in those humane farms, they're treated well, and I don't really see a problem with that.
Well, for the most part, they're not treated well. That's a real myth. But secondly, even if they're treated perfectly, they're still killed for your dinner table and your taste bud. I believe these animals want to live. And that's the bottom line. I can understand it if you don't believe that. I can understand it if you want to continue to believe that. Because for the first 35 years of my life, I ate meat. And I didn't even question it at all. And for the last 15 years of my life, I mostly lived in a KFC. I mostly lived in a McDonald's. I ate out and I ate meat. So I can understand how the rest of us in America are mostly brought up with that idea. I would only ask you to consider that other animals feel pain and suffer. It's something that I had to discover on my own, and I hope you'll discover it too.
I do agree they suffer, but I think it's part of nature that there is suffering. Isn't it okay to, within reason, allow some suffering to happen for your own enjoyment? I mean, isn't the purpose of life to some extent to have pleasure?
Well, it is to have pleasure, but not pleasure on the backs of other non-human animals, and not pleasure on the suffering, which, for example, goes on in here. Just 20 yards from us, animals are being electrocuted and then having their throats slit. I hope you can agree with me that dying of electrocution and then making sure you die by having your throat slit is not a humane way to raise any creature which feels pain, and certainly not for the purpose of serving you on your dinner table bacon or hot dogs.
Well, I'm not sure that electrocution and slitting the throat necessarily makes something inhumane in and of itself. I mean, humane is basically relative to something else. For example, when we have our dogs and we treat them humanely, we still put on collars on them. It doesn't mean that we're treating them inhumanely. And so I wouldn't quite agree that those who have this concept of humane farming, it's a wrong word to use, because in a sense they do want it to be more humane than the standard practice.
Well, you make a good point that there are degrees of suffering. So when I put that collar on my dog, or on a larger level, when I restrict my dog's freedom by keeping him in an apartment and not letting him roam freely, there's no doubt that I'm being inconsistent in my views. And I think we need to admit to our own inconsistencies. But the facts are that there's a huge difference between walking my dog on a leash and putting a captive bolt through the head of a cow, or slitting the throat of a chicken.
There is. So let's take another example of where a lot of vegans do ignore the suffering and death of other creatures for their own pleasure. For example, when many of us decide to go smell the roses, we know that there are lots of ants that may be in the yard. We don't necessarily think twice about it. Some vegans do. Some vegans go out of their way to actually avoid stepping on places where there are ants. But by and large, most of us will walk over grass, not think twice if there's an ant over there, and we're doing it solely for our pleasure because we want to sniff the flowers.
Well, I think the Sikhs are right. I think that in general the Hindu position is right, that suffering is suffering is suffering. And so killing a bug, in my opinion, something I did a lot of as a kid, is certainly wrong now. And so if you're looking for inconsistencies in the vegan lifestyle of most vegans, you are going to find it. The way the vegetables are raised means that whole acres and acres of grass and grasslands have to be destroyed, and that's going to kill the bunnies, and a lot of bunnies.
Yes, I do agree. So are you saying that veganism is more like just a good marker that most of us can aspire to?
Well, that's well put. It is a marker, and you're never, in my opinion, you're never going to get perfect. I think it's about progress, not perfection. You're going to make progress and maybe slow this huge corporate machine down, which is killing millions of these animals every day. So in terms of degrees, I think you have to concentrate on the most extreme, and for right now, the most extreme suffering is in the slaughterhouses and the laboratories all over America and the world.
I agree. Probably the slaughterhouses would be the most widespread, the greatest amount of harm, and the labs would probably be the most intense harm to individual creatures. Would that be fairly accurate?
Yeah, I think that's well put. And instead of making progress here, I think we should be under no illusion what's really happening here. Animal agriculture is spreading, and spreading fast and quickly. And yes, we are making some progress, because you can say that the fake meat market, the soy meat market, the pseudo meat market is going up in terms of the economy of scale in this country. There's no doubt about it. But so is the meat market going up. And if you look at places like Asia, especially South Asia, and South America, especially Brazil, more and more cattle ranches are coming aboard. It's not declining. So we can get kind of complacent, I think, in thinking that because we are eating soy burgers and more people are eating soy burgers, that in fact we're making progress. But that complacency should be tempered by the fact that worldwide there is tremendous emphasis on animal agriculture right now, and it is growing, not declining.
Okay. Coming back to that example where it was nice of you to admit that there is an inconsistency. And I would say sometimes people don't just see it as an inconsistency, they just feel that we're entitled to some things by nature. So some vegans, for example, will say that, yeah, but it's part of life that we walk on grass, so we're entitled to it. But the meat eaters can use that very same feeling of entitlement and say, I'm entitled to eat animals and I'm doing it humanely and I'm comfortable with that. Is there a response you have for such arguments?
Well, my argument is in general that we're not a very good species, us humans, and so we are willing to rationalize all sorts of things. So if you're not eating meat but you're out there crushing spiders, then there's a huge inconsistency there.
Okay, I agree. Okay, thanks, Wayne.
You done? Well, thank you, Aouie, for the good questions. Thank you, Veronica.